Welcome back to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Mendte. New Jersey's Fairleigh Dickinson University in their poll recently asked New Jerseyans whether kids should go back to school in the fall, whether it should be mandatory to wear a mask, and if there was a new COVID-19 vaccine, would you get it? Here's their answers from Krista Jenkins, director of the Fairleigh Dickinson poll. Krista, thanks so much for doing this, and congratulations on your poll.
Thanks.
It got a lot of play, and rightfully so. The topic of the week is reopening schools, and you've polled that. How do New Jerseyans feel about it?
They are conflicted, I think, is just a quick and dirty way of describing how people feel about reopening the schools. We asked New Jerseyans whether we should reopen the schools with the appropriate safety measures in place, or if we should simply resume the online learning that was going on in June when everybody broke for the summer. And we find that, differences are within the margin of error. 46% believe that we should be reopening the schools and taking all of the appropriate safety precautions in order to keep kids, teachers, and school administrators safe, with 42% who believe that we should simply resume the online environment until we get a treatment or we get a vaccine or something that can, provide some measure of comfort for people who might become afflicted with the virus.
You also asked an interesting question, whether people want restrictions still in place at this point, or whether they should lift restrictions. I know it's a pretty broad question, but people weren't as split on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, state leaders are, there's a lot of people who are getting, very anxious about, the continued restrictions that are in place and what it's doing to our economy, et cetera. But it looks like public opinion is quite resilient on staying the course and keeping restrictions in place. We found well over a majority, I believe it was around 2/3 of New Jerseyans who said that it's really the right thing to do at this point, with only about a third, I believe less than that actually, 29%, who said that they would like to see the restrictions lifted and some sense of normalcy return to life in the Garden State. So I think that was pretty interesting.
No, it's fascinating, except it's a very broad question. When you say restrictions, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Although in the same survey, we did ask people about masks, which has become such a, sadly polarizing issue. It's really supposedly an apolitical issue, and it's become highly politicized. New Jerseyans are pretty committed to the idea, however, that masks are, something that we should all be wearing on a mandatory basis. This idea that mask wearing should be optional is not a very widely held belief in New Jersey.
Is there a split between Republicans and Democrats on the issue?
Yeah, like I said, it's become quite polarizing. On the issue of wearing masks, Democrats were significantly more likely to support them as a mandatory option, as a mandatory requirement, as opposed to Republicans who were far less likely to say so.
And vaccines, you asked about vaccines, which is a extremely controversial issue in New Jersey, as we've seen with protest in New Jersey and the fact that they have a difficult time passing a bill on vaccines. And your poll played that out, especially when compared to the rest of the country.
Yeah, so we've done work both statewide in New Jersey and also nationally in the past few months. And we've really interested, we have a School of Pharmacy and Health Sciences at FDU, and they were interested in trying to understand people's attitudes toward vaccines, not only in terms of are you likely to get one, but how confident are you that the vaccine, when and if it becomes available, will have been adequately tested for safety and for efficacy. And we find that, nationwide, there appears to be more confidence in the ability of developers to come up with something that's both safe and efficacious. Whereas New Jersey, for the most part, majority of New Jerseyans do believe that it can be done safely and with great efficacy, but certainly less than what we see nationwide. And on the issue of whether or not you're going to get one, let's say it becomes available, are people likely to, take the vaccine? Again, New Jersey, we're pretty sure that, it is something that we would either definitely do or probably do, with a minority of respondents who say they definitely would not take the coronavirus vaccine when it is.
But 30% said they either probably wouldn't or wouldn't at all. That's high.
Well, it is and it isn't. We live in a world where, vaccines, even before the coronavirus became what it is today, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of movement toward people who believe that, vaccinations are simply not safe to give. And so when you have, 3 out of 10 who say that they're not likely to take it, it might sound surprising, but at the same time, if you contextualize it within the political environment in which we're living, quite honestly, it didn't entirely come as a surprise to me.
Yeah, especially with a new vaccine, because a lot of people that will even take vaccines don't
Right.
trust new vaccines until they're fully tested. So
Absolutely. And, with this, it's likely to be, we know it's being developed and brought to market at a record pace. And there's historically been issues with vaccines that have been brought to market quickly. So, we'll see what happens, but at least, when we look at, where majority sentiment is, confident in the likely virus's safety and efficacy, and also a willingness to take it.
one last thing, you asked about long-term effects and the fear of some family member getting it, and I was really interested in the fact that it seemed like African Americans had a greater fear, that they were more worried about them or someone in their family.
Yes, that's true. We see a lot of differences in racial groups, with particularly African Americans being the least likely to trust various institutions, perhaps even including, medical institutions. There's been a history of, African Americans not being treated well by the medical community. And so I think perhaps that's what we're seeing when it comes to them, feeling a little bit more fearful about rushing to get a vaccine and trusting that it has been adequately tested and safe to use. Yeah.
Again, congratulations. I know these studies are expensive and they take a long time to do, and I'm happy you're getting so much publicity for this one. That was Krista Jenkins from the Fairleigh Dickinson poll. When we come right back, the state takeover of Atlantic City is about to end. So what does that mean for Atlantic City? We'll talk about it when Jersey Matters comes right back.